Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving headfirst into a really critical moment in American history.
That's right. Zachary Taylor's presidency and that whole legislative balancing act, the Compromise of 1850.
We've got some great sources lined up. The actual text of the compromise laws, which is fascinating in itself.
Yeah, an analysis of the political scene back then, incredibly tense. Plus, background on Taylor himself.
So our mission today is to really get under the hood of the compromise, understand the sectional crisis during Taylor's short time in office.
And see how Taylor, this military guy, his background and what he believed sort of intersected with this huge turning point.
It's just such a unique mix, isn't it? You've got this president, basically zero political experience beforehand.
Right. And the country is just teetering, really, over slavery.
And then this massive, complex piece of legislation trying to hold it all together.
Yeah, quite the setup.
Okay, so let's maybe start with the man himself, Zachary Taylor. Military background, not a politician by trade.
Exactly. I mean, his military career was pretty stellar. War of 1812, then later, the Mexican-American War.
Those victories really put him on the map, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. Palo Alto, Buena Vista, those made him a national hero. He had this image, old, rough and ready.
Kind of a man of the people vibe?
Sort of, yeah. Plain speaking, no nonsense. And it's key, like you said, he wasn't really political before running, didn't have strong declared positions.
So how does someone like that win in 1848? It feels a bit unlikely.
Well, maybe not that unlikely. The Whigs, I think they saw a winning formula, maybe like they did with William Henry Harrison, another military hero.
Okay.
Taylor's own beliefs were a bit vague. He liked sound banking, wasn't keen on slavery expanding, and was definitely a nationalist.
But he owned slaves himself, right? A Southerner.
He did, which is the interesting part, a slave-owning Southerner nominated by the Whigs who had a lot of Northern support.
Ah.
And he kind of stayed out of the campaign fray, too.
Right. Then he gets into office, 1849, but it's a short presidency. He dies in July 1850.
Yeah, just over a year.
So given he's a Southerner, a slaveholder, what's his main goal when he's facing this huge slavery debate?
Well, overwhelmingly, it seems his priority was keeping the Union together.
Okay.
Despite his background, he wasn't pushing to expand slavery. His approach to the whole mess was pretty direct. He told California and New Mexico, basically, apply for statehood now.
To sidestep the territorial slavery question.
Exactly, just bypass that whole debate. His relationship with Congress, though, sounds like it was a bit distant. And his VP, Fillmore, was apparently kept out of the loop somewhat.
And then, boom, he dies.
Okay.
Suddenly, after July 4th celebrations, the sources say, some kind of digestive issue.
That's the story, yeah, a stomach ailment.
And that's massive because his successor, Millard Fillmore, he's the one who actually signs the compromise into law.
Precisely. Taylor's death completely...
Okay, let's pull back a bit. This sectional crisis Taylor was dealing with, it wasn't just one thing, was it? It sounds like a whole tangle of issues.
Oh, absolutely. Not simple at all. At the very core, you had this fundamental clash, right? The country's ideals of liberty versus the reality of slavery.
An impossible contradiction, really.
Increasingly impossible, and it was genuinely threatening to break the country apart.
So what were the specific triggers, the flashpoints our sources highlight?
Well, several big ones. A huge one was, what happens with slavery and all that land won from Mexico? California, New Mexico, Utah. Big question mark.
Right.
Then there was the old Fugitive Slave Act from 1793. Northerners were resisting it more and more. That caused a lot of friction.
What else?
Well, you had calls from the North to ban the slave trade, selling people in Washington, D.C.
In the nation's capital.
Yeah. And then Texas was making these big claims on land that New Mexico also claimed. Another major headache.
So where did Taylor stand on all this? Was he fanning the flames or trying to cool things down?
The evidence suggests he was trying to cool things down. He wasn't pushing for slavery to expand, wanted harmony between the sections.
He spoke against secession.
Very clearly, in his State of the Union. And his stance on that Texas-New Mexico dispute was really firm. He actually threatened to use the army against Texas if they pushed it.
Wow. Okay, so that really sets the scene for the Compromise of 1850. Henry Clay comes into the picture here.
Yes, the great compromiser. He was key in drafting the proposals. But Taylor, interestingly, kept his distance from Clay.
Why was that? Did they just not get along?
The reasons are debated, but Taylor definitely didn't embrace Clay's plan. And that distance probably added to Taylor feeling kind of isolated politically.
Okay, let's dig into the compromise itself. What were the actual pieces of this deal that eventually got through Congress.
Right. So it wasn't one single law, but like a package of several measures.
Yeah.
First big one. California comes in as a free state, no slavery allowed.
That's huge for the balance of power.
Absolutely. A big win for the anti-slavery side, shifted the Senate balance. Second, Utah and New Mexico territories were organized.
And slavery there.
That was the tricky part. The laws didn't explicitly say yes or no to slavery there. The idea, basically popular sovereignty, was that the settlers would decide later when they became states.
So, kicking the can down the road, essentially.
You could definitely say that for those territories, yeah. Postponing the fight. Third thing, sorting out that Texas border mess.
With New Mexico.
Right. They fixed the Texas boundary. Texas gave up its claims on parts of New Mexico. And in return,
Money.
the federal government took on a chunk of Texas's old debt. $10 million in federal stock, eventually. That was a pretty big incentive for Texas to agree.
$10 million was serious money then. What else was in the package?
Okay, then there was Washington, D.C. They abolished the slave trade there, the buying and selling of people, starting in 1851.
But not slavery itself.
Not slavery itself. And even abolishing slavery completely in D.C. was tied up with conditions needing Maryland's consent, local consent, paying owners. So a very limited step.
Got it. Now, the part that always comes up, the Fugitive Slave Act.
Mm-hmm.
The compromise changed that, too.
Oh, dramatically.
Yeah.
This was a huge concession to the South. They amended the old 1793 Act to make it much, much stronger, more effectual, as the text says.
More effectual how? What made it so much tougher?
Okay, several things. First, it created federal commissioners. These guys had power like judges specifically for fugitive slave cases.
Okay.
Second, federal marshals had to enforce warrants for runaways. If they didn't, big fine, $1,000. And if a fugitive escaped their custody, the marshal could be sued for the value of the person.
Wow. So, serious consequences for law enforcement.
Very serious. And these commissioners could force ordinary citizens to help capture fugitives, the whole posse comitatus thing.
So, people in the North could be legally required to help catch escaped slaves.
That's exactly right. Huge source of resentment. And then the legal process itself, it was stacked against the accused.
How so?
The hearing was summary. The person accused of being a fugitive couldn't even testify.
They couldn't speak for themselves.
Nope. And the commissioner's decision, the certificate they gave the claimant, was considered conclusive proof. Game over, basically.
That sounds awful.
It was. Plus, heavy penalties, fines, jail time for anyone helping a fugitive, obstructing an arrest, hiding someone, helping them escape. You could face serious trouble, plus civil lawsuits.
And who paid for all this enforcement?
The claimant, the person trying to recover the fugitive, paid the fees for the commissioners, marshals, and so on. The law even laid out how claimants could get legal documents from the slave state as extra proof. It really put teeth into fugitive slave recapture. Deeply divisive.
Absolutely chilling. So, one last bit on the compromise structure. What about trading enslaved people between states? Did Congress touch that?
No, interestingly, the compromise explicitly said Congress had no power over the interstate slave trade. That was left entirely up to the individual slave states.
Okay, so back to Taylor. We know he was kind of aloof from Clay. Did he weigh in on these specific components while they were being debated?
Well, some of his goals lined up with parts of it, like getting California in as a state. But he never really backed the whole package deal.
He wasn't a fan of Clay's overall approach.
It seems not. And his opposition probably didn't help his political standing, contributed to that isolation we talked about. But yeah, the key thing is none of this big compromise legislation actually landed on his desk before he died.
Right. And just quickly, near the end of his presidency, there was something called the Galphin Affair. What was that about?
Yes. That was a scandal involving his Secretary of War, Crawford. It was about Crawford getting paid, basically, for helping some clients collect a really old debt from the government, dating way back before the Revolution.
So a bit of a financial controversy.
Yeah, and it blew up and got a lot of attention right during Taylor's last days, kind of adding another layer of drama to everything else going on with the compromise debates.
Okay, so wrapping this up, this deep dive, the Compromise of 1850 was this incredibly complicated attempt, right? Trying to patch things up over slavery.
A desperate attempt, maybe, trying to bridge these huge, bitter divides that were really threatening to just rip the country in two.
And Taylor's presidency, so short, falls right in the middle of this firestorm. His own views, his actions, they all played a part in how things unfolded.
Absolutely. And I think the key thing for you, the listener, to take away is that the compromise, well, it didn't really solve anything fundamental. It was meant to be a truce, but it just papered over cracks that were too deep. It basically just delayed the inevitable conflict.
Yeah,
And Taylor himself, a Southern slave owner, but putting the Union first, his position really highlights the impossible contradictions of the time.
definitely. So here's a thought to leave you with. Taylor was this military hero really committed to the Union. What if he hadn't died?
Hmm.
How might history have changed if he'd lived and had to deal directly with a compromise vote, maybe even sign or veto it? What does his brief presidency tell us about, how much one leader can do when faced with these massive, deep-seated divisions in society?
That's a great question. Something definitely worth thinking about.
It is. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.